Welcome everyone to People on Dating. I'm your host, Will Morales. And for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, this podcast is about the ups and downs of dating and how to navigate through it. Today, my guest is I just practiced it, Doc, and Vitale.
Vitale.
Vitale Hardin. She is the president and CEO of the Hardin Group. She's a leading expert in perfectionism and how it permeates in individual performance and the corporate culture. Vitale,
Yeah,
thank you so much for being on People on Dating. How are you?
I am good. Thanks for having me on here, Will.
No, it's my pleasure. So, Vitale, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get here? What was that journey like? I know it might be a great long story, but if you give us the short version, how did you get here? What was that journey like? What was that aha moment for you?
Yeah, so I struggled with perfectionism for most of my life. It showed up as a 10-year addiction to Adderall, where it allowed me to be, highly functioning, ridiculously high functioning in the corporate world. So, climbing the corporate ladder, workaholism, getting all the accolades, all these outside, external validation. Um, it allowed me to be extremely thin, so look perfect. My perfectionism also manifested into really toxic relationships and intimate relationships when I was in my 20s and early 30s. And it was when I was 31 years old that I decided, I can't live this way anymore. I've got to let go of the Adderall. And, again, super successful in my corporate career. I mean, I was leading a huge team, had a very public facing job. No one knew I was struggling, but a series of events happened and I was like, I can't live this way anymore. And so 10 years ago, I made the decision to get sober. And, each of us has typically an invitation once or many times in our lives for internal reflection. Maybe it's a death we experience or a health scare or a divorce or a move or whatever, or a breakup. And so getting sober was an invitation for me to look internally. And I realized that my addiction had everything to do with perfectionism. And so I started creating content around it, wrote my memoir, and started my business with a niche focus on the impact of perfectionism in the workplace.
Yeah, no, that's some story. I mean, and it does lead into to personal lives as well, right? Being a
Right.
perfectionism, what are you looking for? Now, so for you, with your let's say your, I hate to say coaching, but let's say coaching for lack of a
Yeah.
better phrase. Have you found that whether it's a woman or a man, uh, how it affects a relationship where someone is, it has that perfectionism gene, and they want to make sure everything is straight from A to Z. How does the other partner get affected? If my question
Yeah.
made any sense at all.
Yes, it does. So I've done national research on the impact of perfectionism. And so I've done a study in 2020 and 2023. And the research shows that 92% of us struggle with some form of perfectionism. And even men, my research shows that men struggle with it more than women.
Mm,
And so it just manifests itself differently. It also showed that, perfectionism impacts relationships by 72%. So it's impacting relationships. And what happens is since we hold ourselves to these ridiculous perfectionist standards, of course, we're going to hold our partner or significant other or friends or even colleagues or people who report to us to these ridiculous standards too. Right? I mean, whatever we're struggling with, if we're not dealing with it, if we're not aware of it, we're going to project it. And so, it creates a lot of tension in relationships and, professional relationships, intimate relationships, friendships, family relationships. Because again, we're expecting people to show up as we want them to show up, not who they are.
wow. So I mean, my God, that's definitely a struggle right there, because if
Right.
you're expecting them to be just as good as you or better or at least even,
Right.
um, how much pressure then is that on that other person then to try to live up to that? It's almost like an impossible task. Am I
It is.
correct there? If you could talk more about that.
Yeah. So it is, right. You're expecting a person to be where you are, right? It's you expect someone to respond or react to things the way you do. One of the obviously major symptoms of perfectionism is control. Like you want to control your environment. And well, hello, we can't control other people.
Mm,
And when you're living with someone, it's an even bigger issue. But we put all these things in place. And so, it also impacts intimate relationships in terms of communication, right? Because we don't share who we really are. or we won't share our needs, or we have fear of setting a boundary, right? If I tell this person they need to do more or treat me a certain way, then they're going to leave me, right? It's this whole fear of abandonment. And so we're like, if I'm perfect, then they won't leave me, which then leads to a really miserable relationship experience.
I think one of the things I got from this was the control of your environment.
Yeah.
Uh, because if you have another person, okay, so for example, if you got, let's say like yourself, how you were when you were in your 20s, now
Yeah.
you're dating someone that's, he's has his foot on the couch, he's watching sports, or she's watching whatever that may be. How did that affect you mentally, or was it both mentally and physically? Because you've seen some person, your partner laying their feet down on the couch and just relaxing. Is that an everyday thing that can happen to just people that have that, let's say, that gene of perfectionism? Again, did my question make any sense at all?
Yeah. So it's, oh, this person should be doing this person should be doing that, instead of allowing them just to be human. Right. Like one of
Mm,
my favorite mantras is like, give myself room to be human. But then on the opposite side of that is to like give others the room to be human. Now, that doesn't mean that people get a free pass to treat you like shit or do whatever, or, like
right.
not any boundaries and just be a, just kind of lay around and do nothing. Um, but it is an invitation to let people be where they are, to communicate thoughtfully. I think another way that perfectionism can show up in dating is that because perfectionism invites us to get our self-worth and validation externally, what happens is we get in relationships with people, and we stay in a relationship because we don't even ask ourselves if we like the person. We're getting our like sense of validation out of them liking us. Oftentimes we get into relationships and people, because they like us, then we feel worthy. We
Oh.
don't even ask the question, do I like them?
Wow. Whoa, that was mind blowing because I've been in that situation where I like
Yes.
someone so much, and I'm far from. Well, you said, what is it?
We don't want to be
Addict?
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and then I realized that the other person didn't. And she was a perfectionist. I could tell
Yeah.
because she even mentioned it. She talked about it, and I think when I look back at it, this is like 4, 5, 6 years ago. I think I disliked her and she was okay with that. But
Yeah.
I didn't get the same. It
Right.
wasn't reciprocated.
Right.
So I was on the opposite side where, yeah,
Right.
listen, I don't mind throwing my sneakers on here or whatever, but she's like, oh, you got to put them here or whatever. But I felt, now looking back, I was like, oh my God, maybe she just, I was there because I liked her, and wasn't the opposite, because I felt it. I felt, no communication in terms
Mhm.
of affection, no touching, none of that. And I'm an affectionate man, and this woman was totally opposite.
Yeah.
But I stood because I did like her. But obviously, it took me a little while to realize, okay, isn't going anywhere.
Right. Right. Or we think we can just prove our worth or win ourselves out, like win someone over. And so we stay in an
Yeah,
unhealthy relationship out of these like, you know, trauma bonds from our childhood and traumatic experiences from our childhood. But perfectionism 100% prevents us from having fulfilling, present, intimate, true emotionally available relationships. It prevents us from being ourselves and communicating well, letting go of resentment, and allowing people to be where they are in their growth journey.
yeah. So that's obviously something from the past that all of a sudden now it's coming to forefront. And if you're with that person, because now I feel, well, I felt like at that time that whatever past mistakes she made with her relationships, I felt it was affecting me. Now, I'm not saying any, there might have been a little bit verbal abuse, and I let it go. I wasn't gonna fight fire with fire. That's not me. But I didn't set boundaries, you
Yeah.
know, and I let that go because I did like her. I did have I mean, I was so much, uh, I guess you could say I did love her, but my God, it was just, we just clashed after 4 or 5 months. We got into business together, and it just didn't work because everything had to be a certain way, how she wanted it, and I felt I was walking on eggshells.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you talk more about that when the other person feels like they got to walk on eggshells?
Yeah, well, I would
Have
say
you
that
been through that?
I have, and
Yeah,
I would say both sides are struggling with perfectionism. So I would say that
yeah,
you were struggling with perfectionism, and she probably was struggling with perfectionism too, because on your end, you weren't saying what you needed.
100%.
You know, like you weren't setting boundaries, you
Yeah,
weren't setting expectations, you weren't talking about your unmet needs. And
mm,
so, as much as this hurts to hear, like that's on you, right? Now,
100%. Yeah,
like, and I can say that because I've been in plenty of dysfunctional intimate relationships. I'm married now, and it's a good marriage. It takes work, but it's a good marriage. But
yeah.
it's so I think it's both. And then, obviously, she's not working on her perfectionism stuff too. So it's both, and it shows up in so many different facets.
So how do we know when we have crossed that line of being a perfectionist? Is that a self-awareness
Um,
thing? Is it someone tells us that? My God, you're so everything has to be blah blah blah. Have you do you know you're making the other person miserable? I don't. Again,
yeah,
I'm trying to.
yeah.
How would you approach that subject?
Yeah, so I would say an easy way to distinguish if you're coming from perfectionism is if you are doing things for love instead of from love.
Can you talk about the
Yeah.
difference?
So doing things for love are, I'm not going to tell you how I feel about this because I need to win over your love. So I'm going to withhold information or withhold this difficult conversation I need to have for love, like to keep the peace. It's, or I'm going to say something to you to earn your love. Like it's for love. So it's doing it, you know what I'm saying? It's not,
Yeah.
you're doing it because you feel like love is earned and that
Mm,
your worth is earned. Now, from love is different. From love is, you know what? I love myself. And you know what? In order for this relationship to stand any chance, I'm going to have to set some boundaries.
right.
And so I'm going to communicate because, and that's coming from love, right? Like I have compassion for myself. I am worthy, and I'm going to communicate this from love, or I'm going to get out of this relationship because I deserve more.
Yeah, I did that. I did the latter, where I just finally
Yeah.
walked away because I figured there was no talking.
Yeah.
Because whenever I try to talk about the subject, it was changed. So then I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I know where I stand. It took a while, but then like I said, I was able to walk away. So are there steps that someone could take, let's say myself or anyone, where if we feel that we're setting boundaries too high for the other person or for ourselves, what can we do to at least bring it down a notch? If that again, if my question made sense, because
Yeah.
it's such I don't want to say a touchy subject, but it's an important subject to talk about.
Yeah. So I think the first is, the real work starts with ourselves. So I think first it's like really starting to look at, because it's easy to blame someone else and it's easy to say that it's the other person's fault. The hard work is doing the work on yourself.
So
Because
having
otherwise,
self awareness will be
right.
okay.
So what I would say, Will, is like really looking at your own perfectionism. And so what I mean by that is what I've done is I've created two types of perfectionism. So it's called the kind of the Vitale method. And there's two types of perfectionism, and it's slow and fast. So slow perfectionism, Will, is a kind of perfectionism that keeps you stuck. So I want you to think about you're procrastinating, you're avoiding difficult conversations, you have a fear of failure, fear of making mistakes, you're not showing up as your authentic self, you're not setting boundaries, right? You're holding yourself back. Then on the other end of the spectrum is fast perfectionism, and that's the people pleasing, always saying yes, unrealistic expectations, go, 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 workaholism, work harder, achieve more, do this, do that. And so most of us are a hybrid, right? We're slow and we're fast, right? We'll
100%.
avoid a difficult conversation, but we have unrealistic expectations. So the first step is really looking at like which pieces of slow and fast are showing up for me and in which areas of my life. And I guess in particular, as it relates to this podcast, my intimate relationships or other relationships. And so you would look at that and so start working on your own perfectionism, right? Because I'm a big believer that you like heal yourself, you heal those around you.
Mm, I like that.
And people will either rise as you rise, or they will leave or you will leave.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
the
you,
work always starts with ourselves.
No, and I like what you said though, because we got to hold ourselves accountable and not blame the other person. Because I remember when I was with this woman 4 or 5 years ago, and when I left, this was I think in the summer of 2020, late 2019, something like that. I started becoming self-aware of what I was doing and what I wasn't doing, and more I wasn't doing. I wasn't setting boundaries. I I I felt I didn't have the abundance mentality.
Right.
Does that come into play in certain situations, especially in a relationship where you can let the other person be the perfect person, but you're not holding yourself accountable or having boundaries because you're letting this person walk over you because you're saying to yourself, well, I don't know if I can find anyone better or just as good. Now you're pretty much at the whim of the person. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. I mean, basically you're settling. No,
Yeah.
well,
Thank you for
no,
being
I mean,
honest.
at the end
That's
of the
true.
day,
It's true.
you're settling and you're also living in fear,
Yeah.
right? There's no trust, most definitely living in scarcity versus abundance. And it's one of those things where it's like, for me, when it comes to that, I always remember the mantra that I cannot miss out on what's meant for me.
Mm.
And so when it comes to relationships, that's always been a saving grace for me because I'm like, you know what? If I break up with this person, like it's always been like a good kind of reminder, right? Like I can't miss out on what's meant for me. Meaning, if I break up with this person and I'm ultimately supposed to end up with this person, then maybe we're supposed to spend 2 years apart and work on ourselves and eventually come together. Or maybe we're not freaking meant to be together and we're going to go meet better people. But for me, that's always been like, instead of always worrying, like, again, that's a control mechanism, right? Like, oh my gosh, I have to stay in this relationship because, well, what if this person, what if he or she gets better? Or what if I can't find anything else? Well, you're sure as hell never going to find out if you can find anything else if you never try. But also, like, just trusting that you cannot miss out on what's meant for you. Like, it is not possible. Like, for anyone listening to this podcast, like, you can't miss out on what's meant for you. Like your person is your person, but you're staying in these like staying stuck in perfectionism and in these unhealthy patterns is really keeping you from what's truly yours. Like what's truly yours is still waiting on you, but you're getting, it's taking longer to get there because of your perfectionism.
Wow. Wow. It's I never thought about it that way because like I said, going through some certain relationships, I always felt, boy, am I enough or is she enough?
Mhm.
And do we set too much high expectations for the other person? Because I started slowly but surely not having those type of expectations because then I let myself down. She didn't meet this certain quality that I was looking for. And I don't want to do that anymore because then I'm putting undue pressure on myself and on the other person without me even saying anything to them.
Right. So I think it's about, I think first understanding how you want to be treated,
Yeah.
what kind of relationship you want, what your values are, and then you have to rise to that level, and then you have to say, then you have to set boundaries. Like, guess what? I'm not going to be talked to that way. I'm
Right.
not going to be treated that way. And then you have to, you know, it's one thing to set a boundary, but then you have to enforce it.
Mm.
So you have to continue because why we teach people how to treat us. And so if we've taught somebody that they can do, say, what act, whatever way they want, it's about really drawing a line for yourself and just saying like, this is gonna like this version of our relationship will not survive.
Right. Yeah, no, no, I definitely get it because I think when people do set boundaries and then all of a sudden they let someone cross it once or twice and then pretty much that's done because now the other person can know they can take advantage in certain situations, certain aspects of your everyday life because they know you're not going to say anything. Um, First of all, Vitalik, thank you so much for being on People on Dating. My God, this was more eye opening than pretty much the last 120 episodes I've done because it's all about, just having boundaries, but not also, but just, being yourself, letting the other person be, not setting, because I did have high expectations when I was younger and never was met. And then I felt that I wasn't enough as a man uh, to
Mhm.
get that out of the other person. Does that
Yeah,
make sense? Yeah.
yeah, totally.
So anyway, so before I let you go, talk more about your book.
Yeah, so my book is called Addicted to Perfect, and it's my memoir. It's how my experience with perfectionism, how I overcame it. So it's a real account of my life that came out in 2020. And I'm writing my second book right now, which is how to turn the volume down on your perfectionism in your personal and work life. So I'm excited about that. That'll be out next year.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, that's for my books. And Will, I'm not sure if you want me to talk about anything else, but I'm
Yeah,
happy.
no, no. Talk about your corporate programs because I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I saw that. So talk more about that.
Yeah, so my business is focused around, corporate training and consulting and coaching. And so I do a myriad of really in-depth leadership development programs for C-suite leaders, middle managers, individual contributors. I do annual programs where there's like a sustainability and consistency so that there's real change happening in companies, but we focus on culture change and overcoming perfectionism in the workplace and all the different components of that, right? Giving and receiving feedback, effective communication, navigating difficult conversations, building intentional relationships, effective performance management, building trust and psychological safety. So it's been a true pleasure to work with the companies and clients that I get to work with, and I love doing it every single day.
Yeah, I mean, my God, you must have such a busy schedule. Like, do you have time for a personal life to at least unwind?
I do. I'm very intentional about scheduling downtime and alone time, and I have a 12-year-old, a husband, and a 6-month-old, and so life is highly scheduled. But I make sure to get time to myself for sure.
Yeah, no, it's definitely having a skill of time management. Anything else you would like to talk about or promote before I let you go?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn. It's just Vitale Buford Harden. And so, yeah, I'd love for people to connect with me on LinkedIn. But mostly, I just hope people hear that from this call, that you can't miss out on what's meant for you. That if any of this message, rings true for you, like this is an opportunity to overcome your perfectionism and let it go. And my life completely changed when I started letting go of my perfectionism and turning the volume down on my perfectionism. I met my soulmate. I started a business. I let go of friendships that were no longer serving me. I really created the life that was in alignment with who I really am. And so it can, I believe, have the most profound impact on your life.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And tell us that website one more time.
What now?
Tell me your website. Where else can
Oh,
people
yeah, yeah,
find
yeah.
you? Yeah, talk about the
Just
website one more time.
thehardengroup.co.
All right, I'll definitely put that on the show notes. Well, Vitaly, first of all, thank you so much for being on People on Dating and taking time out of your busy schedule. I really, really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Yep, my pleasure. Bye bye.